All right. So now, first, I have to say, shout out to, thank you to Dr. Cornell West, because Dr. Cornell West is the one who, you know, I listened to his interviews and his presentations, his lectures, especially when I was in Korea. Um, and and also, I thought I was on the same level as Dr. Cornell West because Tavis Smiley and Cornell West at one time, maybe in 2010, 2011, 2012, I don't know what year it was. It was around that time, however. But they traveled to China. And I was like, dang, I'm in South Korea and Dr. Cornell West and Tavis Smiley, wow, they're in China. They're just 2 hours away, a 2 hour flight away from me. So I felt like, man, we're on the same wavelength because we're seeing the world together from the perspective of Asia. So I thought that was cool. But Dr. Cornell West, in his lectures and in his interviews, talked about John Coltrane, the jazz musician, the jazz great, and John Coltrane. So the thing about John Coltrane is that his mission on earth was to heal people and to enlighten the people, right? Healing and enlightenment through his music. This was his goal. He wanted to heal people and enlighten them. And so, in particular, this video that I watched online about the what is it the church of John Coltrane in San Francisco, they mentioned that John Coltrane, it says, I quote, isolation inspired his spiritual awakening. He sat in the attic alone. All right, that's what they said to describe his experience. Isolation inspired his spiritual awakening. So in my story, same thing. I was isolated. I was far away in the desert of Oman when when I had this epiphany, right? Um this documentary, they talk about John Coltrane. They said that he sat in the attic alone, and that's when I guess his epiphany came to him, the moment of clarity, and then he was able to write his album. John Coltrane wrote his album when he was in the attic. He got it. It came to him. He got it, and he came down from the attic and he presented his work. In my case, I was in the desert. I was all alone. Events, international events were, affecting my psyche, and a moment of clarity, came to me, and I could understand why these international events had occurred. And then I felt that it was my job to bring these stories together, to put all of my ideals together. So that was my spiritual awakening occurred then in the desert of Oman, where I was alone, just like John Coltrane, and I was able to write. And so I wrote my poem 109, which I couldn't do before that moment of clarity. I couldn't do it, but that moment came to me, and I was able to find that theme, that plot, that storyline to connect all of these isolated incidents. That's when it happened, when I was in Oman. John Coltrane said to his wife, for the first time, I've received it all at once. And I can understand that. I can relate to that because that's how I felt. First, I saw the cover of my book, 109, but then I received it all at once when I was in the desert of Oman. Yeah, deep stuff, right? And then as I was watching that video, that documentary, they were saying that John Coltrane chose everything for his album. He chose the artwork, he chose the liner notes, and he even chose a prayer that he included as part of the album. We're talking about A Love Supreme. And people have argued in the documentary they say that arguably A Love Supreme is John Coltrane's most intentional and sacred work. Most intentional and sacred work. So when I think about my experience with 109, it parallels John Coltrane's experience. Spiritual awakening in isolation, receiving it all at once, choosing the artwork, choosing the notes, writing the stories, choosing the pictures. In my book 109, it's wholly a work that I chose, that I sat down and I had to create. There's very little, if any, outside um influence on what I wrote, on what I wrote, and the pictures that I took. I took those pictures. I saw these things when that you see in the book. I took these pictures. The words that you read, these are my words. It's like I made all of the decisions, and I brought that, whole thing to you. What you're holding in your hands, that was all, sprang forth from my mind, from my experience, from my understanding, and from my accepting God's mission. I mean, that's what it is. So anyway, A Love Supreme, I wouldn't have known anything about A Love Supreme had I not listened to and followed Dr. Cornel West. So in that sense, everything is everything. So, we come full circle. You know, the great scholars are going to hearken. I mean, our scholars are going to pay homage to our musicians, and our musicians are going to pay homage to the athletes and to the painters. You name it. Everybody, we are all one, and we are all made in God's image. So we are all geniuses. We all have the capacity for all of this. Speaking of artists, Jean-Michel Basquiat wrote about John Coltrane, or Train, and would do his artwork, you know, in to pay homage to Donald Byrd, to Charlie Parker, to um, John Coltrane, Muhammad Ali, artists, athletes, you name it, entertainers. Jean-Michel Basquiat paid homage you know, to the gods. And then so my story 109 is following the same tradition of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. Period. You dig? And then so A Love Supreme is acknowledgement, resolution, pursuance, and psalm. And those four components for John Coltrane, he was presenting the path to enlightenment. And essentially that's what 109 is. 109 is the path to enlightenment. It's the path to, or it's the affirmation of knowledge of self. When you have knowledge of self, you will do right by yourself, or do right by your God. That's what John Coltrane, that's what the whole Church of God of John Coltrane was about prayer, meditation, and fasting. It's deep, y'all. It's deep. 109, John Coltrane, Dr. Cornel West, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Dr. Greg Carr, Karen Hunter, Tavis Smiley, Paul Mooney, Dave Chappelle, and Bob Marley, Nipsey Hussle, Tupac Shakur, Eldridge Cleaver, Ahmad, Maceo Eldridge Cleaver. Just a few names of people who have, who are my heroes, people I met, whose paths I've actually crossed, whose hands I shook, and then they had an impact on me. Oh, and today, Diggable Planets, Ishmael Butler, Marianne Vieira, and Craig Irving, also known as Butterfly, Ladybug, and Doodlebug of Diggable Planets. Man, like, today I went to the store and I was rocking the Diggable Planets hat. I was wearing it earlier. And the brother said, "Oh, Diggable Planets." He was like, "Yeah, I remember Ish. Ish used to stay at stay at my home." And I was like, "What?" He's talking about one of my heroes having lived with him, been a roommate with him. I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, man. I go way back. Ish was right there. Ishmael Butler." And then he went in and talked to more and he was like, Ish is, and he was referring to the past, so was, uh, you know, deep thinker, brilliant guy, a genius. And he said, man, he produced the music for Diggable Planets. And then the brother said, I can't think of anybody other, I can't think of anybody like Ishmael Butler, except for, and I was wondering who he was going to say next. And I'm thinking he's like DJ Quick. And I was like, yeah, man, you know your Ish as in Ishmael, but also Ish as in, SHIT. You know your Ish. I can't think of anyone else who's that dope, who's producing the music as well as a dope lyricist. So salute to that brother. I won't say his name and give out all these details. I just want to say, man, we never know who we're talking to at any given moment. We never know. It's 6 degrees of separation. It's all, and everything is everything. Man, I was going to get into, I forgot. The reason why I started this is to talk about these 3 books. Let me do that quickly. So, going back to the spiritual awakening, having these moments, right? Here's the book that I got from Adrian in middle school, the autobiography of Malcolm X, right here. I'm actually reading it. I mean, shout out to Mai, and she just read chapter 16 at the marathon reading of Malcolm X, of the autobiography of Malcolm X in New York. She just read it. Anyhow, yeah, I'm reading it too, and I'm putting my voice, my recording on my iPod, on my podcast. Yep, so you can hear me read. I've done chapter 1 already. I'm into chapter 2. I haven't finished it. But Malcolm X said that he had a spiritual awakening, a moment when a vision of Elijah Muhammad came to him when he was in prison. Like, wow. And then he could, prostrate himself, and pray. Before that, he couldn't do it. Malcolm X had a spiritual moment. And part of my spiritual moment, occurred when I was in the desert and I had this book and I was learning about Ethiopian history. This is the Battle of Adwa. And I learned about the Battle of Adwa when I was in Ethiopia. And then I wanted to do more reading. And I had to go to like the Harvard Press in order to find this book. 1896. It gave me some insight into Ethiopia. And then I was listening to Dr. Greg Carr and Karen Hunter, and they mentioned this book, The Sons of Sheba's Race. And that's when I went online to find a copy to get it, and I began reading it. And this is a first edition. It's a signed copy. This was over $100 for this book. And I began reading it, and I found it so powerful that the men, African American men in the 1930s and 40s, when the Italo-Ethiopian War was taking place, African American men wanted to fight in this war on the side of Ethiopia. But America, being what it is, racist nation that it is, and that it was at that time, of course, it hasn't changed. would not allow African Americans to fight, against a colonizer. Wow. Think about that in today's terms. If you, as an African American, decided, hey, I want to fight on the side of Palestine against Israel, right now, today, the United States would not allow Americans to, board planes and fly to Palestine to fight on the side of Hamas. Wow. So as American citizens, Black American citizens, we have to sit by and watch as atrocities occur. Wow. Peace and blessings.